On May 19th, 1780, the sky over New England went dark at noon. Not cloud dark, dark enough that chickens went to roost and candles were needed to read at midday. Dozens of accounts survive. Across Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Canada, all describing the same event. A darkness, unlike storm or night, accompanied by a smell of burning that was not like ordinary wood smoke, with a blood-red moon that cast no useful light that evening. The modern scientific explanation, wildfire smoke from Ontario combined with overcast cloud cover, is plausible. But when you run the atmospheric models, the geographic extent and uniformity of the documented darkness sits at the edge of what that explanation can support. I want to read you something. A letter written on May 19th, 1780, by a farmer in Connecticut, whose name has not survived but whose account has. Preserved in a collection of colonial-era documents at a New England Historical Society. The letter is addressed to his brother in Boston and describes what happened that morning in plain and careful language. He writes that, at approximately 10 in the morning, the sky began to darken in a way that was different from ordinary cloud cover. He writes that by noon it was dark enough that he could not read without a candle, that the chickens had gone to roost as they do at dusk, that his children were frightened, and that he himself was unsettled. He writes that the darkness had a quality he did not know how to describe, other than to say it was not like night and not like storm, but like something he had no word for. He writes that the air smelled of something, a smell he associated with burning, but not with the ordinary burning of wood or peat. And he writes, at the end of his account, that he does not know what it means, but that he has never seen anything like it in 50 years of farming, and that he believes it is the kind of thing that should be written down and remembered. It was written down, and it was remembered. The New England dark day of May 19th, 1780, is one of the best documented atmospheric events in pre-instrumental American history. Dozens of accounts survive, from Connecticut, from Massachusetts, from Rhode Island, from New Hampshire, from the parts of what is now Canada that were then under British administration. The accounts agree on the essential character of the event, a darkening that began in the morning and reached its maximum intensity at midday, a darkness that was qualitatively different from ordinary overcast conditions, a smell associated with burning, a persistence through the afternoon and evening, and a nighttime sky in which the moon appeared blood-red and cast no useful light. The accounts agree, and they are too numerous and too geographically distributed to be explained as the exaggeration of a single witness or the legendary embellishment of a local tradition. What happened? The official scientific explanation developed in the late 20th century when researchers applied modern atmospheric science to the historical record, is that the darkness was caused by a combination of thick wildfire smoke from fires burning in what is now Ontario and Quebec, combined with an overcast cloud layer that trapped the smoke at low altitude and amplified its light-blocking effect. This explanation is plausible. Large wildfires do produce dramatic atmospheric optical effects. The combination of smoke and cloud cover can reduce midday illumination to the levels described in the 1780 accounts. The smell of burning that multiple accounts describe is consistent with wildfire smoke. But the explanation has a specific problem that I keep returning to. The documented area of darkness on May 19th, 1780, extends from approximately the eastern Great Lakes region to the Atlantic coast of New England and into the maritime provinces of Canada. This is a geographic extent of roughly 1,000 miles east to west and several hundred miles north to south. For a wildfire smoke event to produce uniform darkness across this area, simultaneously, the smoke would need to be present at sufficient density over this entire area at the same time. The atmospheric dynamics required to distribute smoke at sufficient density across this geographic extent, from the source fires in Ontario, involve wind patterns and atmospheric mixing processes of a specific character. When researchers have modeled these dynamics using the best available paleoclimatological data for 1780, the models produce events that are consistent with the documented darkness in parts of the affected area, but not uniformly across it. The geographic extent and uniformity of the documented event is at the edge of what the wildfire smoke explanation can account for. I am not saying the wildfire smoke explanation is wrong. I am saying it is incomplete. And I am saying that the incompleteness is significant when you place the 1780 dark day in the context of the broader sequence of atmospheric anomalies that appear in the late 18th century. Historical record. The 1780 dark day is not isolated. It sits in a sequence. The period from approximately 1750 to 1820 contains, in the historical and instrumental records of multiple continents, a series of atmospheric events whose character and frequency exceed what normal climatic variability would produce. The Laki eruption in Iceland in 1783 produced a documented atmospheric haze across Europe that lasted for months and significantly reduced summer temperatures. The year 1816, the year without a summer, produced crop failures across the northern hemisphere and is attributed to the 1815 eruption of Tambora in Indonesia. Between these documented volcanic events, the historical record contains multiple accounts of anomalous darkness, unusual atmospheric coloration, and what contemporaries described as a persistent dimming of the sun over periods of weeks and months, in years that do not correspond to any documented major volcanic eruption. The 1780 dark day is one of these events. It occurred 3 years before Laki and 35 years before Tambora. There is no documented major volcanic eruption in 1780 whose atmospheric effects would account for the New England darkness. The wildfire smoke explanation is what remains when the volcanic explanation is unavailable. And the wildfire smoke explanation, as I've described, is at the edge of what atmospheric modeling can support for the specific character and geographic extent of the 1780 event. What else could have produced the 1780 darkness? Here I want to be specific about what the evidence suggests rather than what it proves, because the evidence suggests something that I cannot prove. The sequence of atmospheric anomalies in the late 18th century, from the 1780 dark day through the anomalous dimming events of the 1780s and 1790s to the year without a summer in 1816, is consistent with a pattern of atmospheric loading that is not well explained by the documented volcanic events of the period alone. It is consistent with the kind of atmospheric loading that very large fires produce. Not regional wildfires, but fires of the scale associated with the destruction of major urban infrastructure. Fires that burn not just forest, but the organic material accumulated in large settled areas, the timber of buildings, the stored agricultural products, the accumulated fuel of urban density. If the reset of Tartarian civilization involved, as some of the evidence suggests, the destruction by fire of major urban and industrial infrastructure across a significant geographic area, the atmospheric loading from those fires would have been, depending on their scale and geographic distribution, something qualitatively different from regional wildfire. The accounts of the 1780 dark day describe an event that is qualitatively different from the ordinary experience of wildfire smoke. The smell described as associated with burning, but not like ordinary wood burning. The darkness described as unlike storm darkness. The quality of the event that the Connecticut farmer had no word for in 50 years of experience. These qualitative descriptors, consistent across multiple independent accounts, describe something outside the ordinary range of atmospheric experience, something for which the existing vocabulary was insufficient, something that the new scientific establishment of the late 18th century, committed to natural explanation and to the management of the historical memory of the Reset period, classified as an unusual but natural weather event, and moved past. The 1780 dark day fell, and this is not a coincidence I can explain, but also cannot ignore, in the specific window of the Tartarian cartographic erasure. Between the Lisbon earthquake of 1755 and the early 19th century, the maps were being redrawn, the archives were being reorganized, the inheritance period was beginning. And in the middle of that window, the sky over New England turned dark at noon on a day in May, and people who had never seen anything like it wrote letters about it that survive in historical collections. And the smell of burning that multiple witnesses described has never been adequately sourced. Not to specific fires, not to specific geographic locations where fires of sufficient scale and proximity could account for the density of smoke required, just burning, coming from somewhere, making the sky dark in a way that 50 years of farming had not prepared a Connecticut farmer for. And that the official atmospheric science of the late 20th century has explained, carefully and plausibly, and not quite sufficiently as the product of Ontario wildfires and overcast conditions. The darkness lasted a day. The moon was red. The sky was yellow the following morning. And then the world continued, and the inheritance period continued, and the maps were redrawn, and the event was filed under weather, because weather is what you call things you don't want to explain. If the 1780 dark day occurred in the middle of the cartographic erasure of Tartaria, and if the smell of burning that multiple independent witnesses described has never been successfully sourced to any specific fire, what was burning? And why has a century of atmospheric science been satisfied with an explanation that doesn't quite fit? Share your thoughts below, and send this to anyone who studies early American history and has come across accounts of that May morning.